Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Buildable Podcast. And today I have like a very interesting guest. I would let him introduce himself, but I'll tell you something. This guest has gone from actually being a software engineer, someone that ran business in software, ran a venture studio, a podcast host, and it went back into being a founder in an early stage startup. This is like a lot of things you do. You went from actually like, basically like getting money from founders to build their ideas, being a host on a show, and going back to being a founder that is trying to raise money for your own idea as well. That's like a lot of things for one person. So, Ivok, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
And thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, and I love the concept of the show. Actually, I haven't told you that I always wanted to start a show similar to yours.
Oh, nice!
I think it's very important to unpack these different phases of building products, specifically tech products. So I'm really happy to be here.
Nice.
I mean, you've mentioned most of the things. So far, I've been on let's say both sides, or on two sides out of a few that you have, and I think that's important to get. I think it's important to understand all sides. I think it's very important to understand the engineering side. It's important to understand the business side. And it's extremely important to understand the investor side.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you can make these three work, then you have a good chance of succeeding with your venture. So looking forward to unpack the story.
So thanks for joining us, Vok, actually. Here's the thing. I'd like to always repeat my KPI for Buildable before I always start. And then the simple KPI here is that for every episode of Buildable you listen to, right, I want you to be able to take what if into let's build. What that simply means is that any idea you have for every episode of Buildable you listen to, you should have some sort of building block to actually make that idea work for you, or at least maybe scrap it and think of something else, get back to your drawing board. So yes, Vok, I'd like to start with like a very simple question. Well, what are you currently building that actually excites you at the moment? For someone like you that has gone through many phases of building on both sides, investor, business, engineering, what are you currently building that excites you?
So I'm working on two things really. One is Podster, which is a network of podcast studios. And then the second thing is Podix. Podix is basically a software that was born out of a necessity to solve a few problems in our podcast studios. It's a revenue operation software for a podcast studio industry. And we're currently getting out to the market and experiencing a lot of interesting challenges that are teaching us lessons that we never were aware of before.
Experienced before. Yeah, that makes sense. We'll come back to Podix in like a few minutes. But like there's this very burning question I like to ask like my guest. I've decided I'll start asking my guest actually. And it's basically like, what do you think people get wrong mostly when building product, especially in Dubai? Let's say Middle East actually. What do you think?
All right, maybe we can start holistically as a whole and then narrow it down to Middle East as we unpack. I mean, obviously there are so many things that we all do wrong that I'm still doing wrong. Building a business, regardless whether that's a technology business or any other type of business, is basically following very similar phases. There are some nuances of tech businesses that you need to be aware of, but overall, I believe in building businesses, and that there is only one way to build a successful business, and that's following a well-defined process of building businesses as a whole, and in general, that's been happening over the previous hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What I've been seeing happen most of the time, and especially when I was on that other side running a venture studio and a software engineering firm, is that people underestimate the effort, time, energy, and money they need to put in a software business, and in most cases don't really understand the dynamics of a software, especially if they're coming from the other side, coming from any other industry with an idea, thinking about building a web app or a mobile app. and assuming that's a quick piece of work that is done once, and then you go out on the street and sell it. And I think this is like the beginner's mistake 101 that's been happening. And this is probably where people would have to educate themselves a little bit more, understand, and get in touch, or join co-founders who really understand tech. And then from that really mistake, a lot of other mistakes pile up. But this is the number one. Before you even started, this is one of the mistakes. And there are obviously many others that we can now unpack. This is exactly the first one that came to mind.
Yeah, so like, I mean, top of mind, like for based on what you've said, is like just understanding the scope and what is actually needed for a successful software business.
And understanding that scope is ever evolving. There is no scope. Evolving. I mean, there is a scope of that idea that can be, built into a certain MVP, but that was really just the beginning. So many times when we were operating a software business, we were approached by individuals who said, "Hey, I have an idea for a marketplace of a certain kind," and I know that in their mind they prepare to invest $100,000, for example, and they consider this as a significant investment. It is for an average individual who doesn't understand software. $100,000 seems like a lot, and then we would quote them, let's say, 90,000, right, to build, and this was just an MVP, just the first MVP that will actually open the door of a learning curve. In their mind, they were like, okay, 90,000, then I have 10,000 more to do some marketing, and this should give me some traction, and I can build up. I mean, that's it. You've put a nail in the coffin of your product, because after those 90,000 are spent, you need to spend another 300,000 to really bring it to a state after you start learning from the customers who are experiencing your product.
Yeah, I think based off of what you said, like the 90,000 to the 300,000 analogy, it brings me to like one of the things we actually discussed in one of our chats, which is like, MVP is different from scaling, right? Now you've spent years building MVP. Now you are building Podix, right? Podix. And then at this stage, you are at the point where it's not just an MVP. You actually are now on the other side of what those founders experience, because you've had so much experience building MVP. I'm sure building Podix was even probably a breeze for you. You were able to like build it. What would you say is like the difference between like building and scaling? Like, and how would you even like explain that to like a first time founders? Anybody looking to build, what would you expect them to look out for when they think building versus scaling? You could use Podix as a good case study, if that works, or just give a context in that space. Yeah.
Man, MVP is a joke.
My goodness. MVP, you had that from Vok, by the way. He said MVP is a joke. I'd keep that in mind.
I've been building MVPs for those 10 years, since 2014 till 2024. And I guess because of how our business was set up, and because of the type of clients that we were working with, which was usually individuals looking to build an idea up, or corporates who were operating innovation labs, we actually didn't really have a lot of chances to go beyond the MVPs. MVPs were usually those MVPs that we were engaged on, that we would spend anywhere between 6 months to a year, let's say, of engagement, would end their life cycle, because either there was not more funds to proceed, or innovation lab dropped the idea. And MVP is a joke, and I'm not saying this in a negative context. It's just a very safe sandbox place where you're playing around without a lot of consequences. The real thing starts when you actually go out to the market, and when you start onboarding customers, and when all of the things that you're not paying attention when you're building a product come to surface, which is the infrastructure, the performance, the database, the code, the architecture. These are the things that an average founder don't even see. You just hear it from the engineers, and obviously they can tell you anything if you don't understand.
They tell you anything to pass the deadline. I'm an engineer also, but I don't do that, please. But they probably tell you anything to pass the deadline and to get you off their neck because of the.
And I don't blame engineers. It's just the way how the industry works. Very few engineers actually also been with a product for more than a few years, and many engineers actually didn't experience the proper scale.
Yes.
Or they experienced the proper scale after the scale was already achieved, and they joined the company that is already a well-oiled machine, and they become a part of the process. There is really just a few engineers out there who've been from MVP to scale that can come back to you and bring that experience back and tell you what needs to be done.
That is actually very perfect. Like what you've just said now is so true, and I can 100% relate to it, because I have also worked as a software engineer. I've led teams. I've had to manage engineers, and I've also, for me personally, I mean, in the intro, most viewers would know, I only enjoy working with startup. So I've been, I'd say, on the lucky side of building MVP and scaling it. I know, I worked in a US firm where I joined at the MVP stage, and then just last month, they actually reached 300 million in revenue. And I was there up until end of last year before I started Buildable, which means to the point of scale, it was enough to understand what we experienced from day zero to that point. And so I agree with you, because many times when I see developers or engineers actually build product and then businesses push them, many times they don't just tell you anything because they want to. Sometimes they don't even necessarily know what to tell you differently. I can tell you for a fact, right now I'm currently building a couple of blockchain ideas, and then as at now, we are still in stealth mode, and we've processed around close to $40 million US in on-chain transaction volume. And the scale at which we had to quickly build from 12 million to 40 million was a whole different level. We had to think differently when we had those users bringing in large volume, because from 12 million to 40 million happened in the span of 6 months. So imagine the kind of users we had within that 6 months, and their demand, their user base and stuff. So yeah, I think you're very right around, there are very little developers that have built MVP and scaled. So what would you say now? That brings me to a very interesting question. When we talk about MVP and founders, people usually say MVP is forgiving. And that's why many founders fall into the space where they would hire a junior person, because they'd be did you see the V1 of Facebook? It looks somehow this way. It wasn't the perfect product. Do you think we are still at that phase of startup building where MVP should still be forgiving? When people give you analogies, they'll be check the version 1 of Google, check the version 1 of Amazon. It wasn't perfect. They just had to launch. Do you think that is still something that should happen in today's startup world for founders?
It depends. I think it depends of the team that you have. If you have a team that can quickly restructure your software and deploy it to the market, you have the luxury to go out to the market with maybe a first version that is really done quick and dirty. But I doubt that the first version of Facebook or first version of Google, what people are judging, that was from the UX perspective looking simple, was simple in the core. They managed to scale Facebook enormously over a very short period of time without crashing a lot of times.
Exactly.
So I think it's natural that you follow this trail and that you build something quick and dirty at the beginning. Because maybe somewhere deep inside you don't even believe that the scale can happen that fast. Yeah. But when it happens, the technical debt that you created at the beginning can cost you your life.
Yes.
If we had a few conversations even in Podix now where some of the engineers would say that we had to rebuild the whole solution now. And obviously, because we changed teams 3 times, obviously when you bring a new team on board, they would say, hey, the previous code is a mess. We need to do a complete refactoring and rebuild the solution from scratch, which sometimes is necessary, but it usually can be avoided. Yeah. From the experience of talking to people who've done it and who've been there. And refactoring and rebuilding a project is extremely risky operation if you're not 100% certain what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So my learning is that if you are engaging into a software project that has a potential to scale, and you're taking it seriously, you really want to build a business, you need to find the engineers that have been in the war. And that can bring the experience of really scaling a solution. You cannot validate that. You need to find people that you trust that can validate that they've done it. Because as a founder while I'm tech savvy, I don't understand neither. I'm far from knowledgeable about engineering. I cannot interview an engineer. They can tell me anything. I cannot judge their knowledge. You can. The best way to do it is through referrals, recommendations.
True.
Now, where the trap where everyone falls is everything is fun and games and safe in the beginning. You don't see a consequence of that decision on the table. So someone seems fine. They have 20 years of experience. They have mentioned a few startups they worked on. They seem to be the right fit. It's you don't see a consequence immediately of hiring them. And then you're like, close one eye, fingers crossed. This person should be good. The size of the consequence of that bad hire at that time is unproportional comparing to what you feel. Because if they don't do a good job, it might shut down your business because you are not the one who can spend weekends recoding. You need to pay for every hour of coding. And at one point, you're going to run out of funds.
And then the truth about paying for another person to fix a previous developer mess is like, it's almost an impossible game to play.
It's almost an impossible.
Every developer would always find problem with another developer's code. It's almost very hard to not find that. So I think one key takeaway, like I just like giving for everybody listening, especially aspiring founders, is whenever you're trying to build a product, according to what Volker said, is like you want to think scale from day zero if you know you want to truly scale your product. I used to say this to my team whenever I work with them, is that the most permanent code is that temporary code you left in your code base. It's actually the most permanent one. You know, when you do fix this later.
Exactly.
30 years later, it's still there. Someone showed me, a friend sent a screenshot while he was looking through like, I think it was, I don't want to mention them. I think it was like one of this big software company, like they've been around for 20 years. In the header of their code, someone wrote a to-do there, like to fix this later, migrate this to X service. They've been around for 25 years.
Sure.
That is still there. So the most permanent code in your code base, it is those to-dos you keep there. So you just want to fix them as soon as you can. And then again, like you've nailed it really. It's like you don't even know who the right IR is 100%. People could say things to you that would make you feel like, oh, this guy is the best. But the truth, I feel like one thing I could say, maybe like from my experience of hiring and also working with team, one thing I can tell founders is like when you are looking for someone to hire to build your product, potentially look for people with doers mindset. You want to look at, say, if they worked with 10 startups, you want to look at what time did the startup start and what time did they join. It's very important. So if a company started like 2020, and then someone is working at, and even if the startup is very big, and then the person joined in 2022, understand that they met something that already was big from the start, right? But if they joined 2020 and they probably left 2022, understand that they were like a day zero engineer.
That's and they might messed it up and they got fired after 2 years when they realized they didn't do it well.
Okay, that's another fair point actually. So like, there's actually no one shoe fit all based off of what he said, but you just want to look at this pointer and make it make sense. There's always a pattern to every resume. There's always a pattern to every developer's profile. And then for me, when I look out for when I want to hire a developer for a startup, I just look for the doer's mindset. Like I ask you the most impossible question and I hear what you would say to the answer. Like, you know, some developers, you just tell them that, oh, what do you think about using Redis, for example, for this particular thing? You know, let's say Podix is probably building like a Calendly system where like you're managing your calendar. At the point where someone already selected a date, you probably want to keep that date reserved for, let's say, 30 minutes, so another person does not select it. Now, you probably don't need to send that to the database. You probably want to keep that in like a very temporary storage, like a Redis. And then now, if I'm interviewing for someone for Podix, for example, I would ask a question like that and I would hear what their attitude to Podix is. If they tell me Redis is like an overkill already, I already know like this person will probably do the barest minimum to get things done. Because you want to think scale. You want to think, what if 10 people are actually on the same link trying to book the same date and the same time? How do you manage like the race conditions? So like, they're like very subtle things to look out for, but it comes with like the years and stuff.
That's good when you know how to ask that question.
Exactly.
When you have a tech background. Most of the founders, especially in the Middle East, now narrowing it down to the Middle East, but most of the founders these days around the world are actually not that tech savvy.
True.
They are entrepreneurs, go-getters, business-minded people with an idea that are looking for a tech team or a tech co-founder who can pull it off. So when you are hiring, there is no way you can veto that.
Yeah.
So the only way, what I've learned now after these years, is to build a network around yourself of people that you trust, that demonstrate that they know what they're doing, and then use them to find and source yourself a tech team. And then once the tech team is sourced, keep asking for clarifications until the point you really feel stupid about asking the question. But it's very important they explain you.
It's very important.
Sometimes you skip the explanation because you assume they know what they're doing.
They don't.
And then you realize 6 months later they actually haven't done that.
They haven't done that.
So it's very important to make them bring you up to speed and explain you what exactly they're doing, even when it feels for them that they're explaining like most basic things. It's really important that you understand, because that's sort of a track system that everyone is on track.
True. You actually raise a very good point, and I really want to reiterate that is like, as founders, always ask the question. There's no stupid question. Ask until the point where the question feels like it's stupid. But the thing is, once the engineering team is able to explain to you, you get some level of confidence in what they are doing. By the way, from what you said, I have like a very good startup idea for people listening to podcasts. Co-founder as a service. Build one for the Middle East. Let's see you come up with something nice. What do you think?
Co-founder as a service, fractional CTO as a service is definitely a need. We just brought on board a fractional CTO, 30 years of experience, vetoed by people that I know. And immediately when someone like that joins the table of our team, you see the difference. You see a difference in thinking, in the approach, in patience, in the way how they look at time frames, in the way how they look at sprints. It's just a necessity, especially when you are out of that MVP phase and out in the market. But if the earlier you bring them, you're going to save yourself a lot of time later on.
That makes sense. So
I think it's very important to reiterate that. It's very important to remember that not a lot of engineers have been in the proper war.
Not a lot. Actually, not a lot.
So, and in most cases, whether you hired an agency, software development firm, or an individuals and hired your own team, it's unlikely that you have enough experience in that team to roll out idea to the market. And if you don't have enough experience, without any bad intentions, everyone will have a good intention. Let's build, let's go. You will collectively make a lot of mistakes that will cost you a lot of money to fix later on. So hiring that fractional talent early on can save you an enormous amount of money, time, and energy later on, and possibly can save you from dying.
True. So there you have it, guys, from Buildable Podcast with Vok. There's a market for you to build in. There's CTO as a service, there's co-founder as a service, there's fractional CTO. Go ahead and build. I really actually like Buildable Podcast. See, the last episode, the last guest I had, we actually gave out an idea for people to build as well. It's like something
This is a
around.
great idea, but I would be surprised if fractional CTO as a service doesn't exist already.
Yeah, I'll probably check. Like that's something like probably we would
But
have
in
it as
Middle
a
East,
discussion. Yeah.
Spot on. We should actually stop the recording now and go build it.
And go build it actually. So yeah, maybe we cut and then we go build the fractional CTO. But please don't cut it. But yeah, I mean, I like how you mentioned something, and then I also want to give one simple one learning in the aspect where you've talked about like people that has gone to war, or you mentioned something about how to identify, like everybody has that mindset of let's build. In my years of experience building startup, there's one thing I've learned is like when you are trying to build and then you have the concept of like let's build, always think user first. I tell you, like every product that is user centric, they hardly have a problem of scale. If you think of a way to give your users a good experience, the chances of you not designing your database or your infrastructure to scale is very little. I'll give you a good example. Let's use, I don't know the inner workings of Podix, but I would use something like, let's say, Blockradar, a blockchain product I'm working on. As an example, Blockradar is a wallet infrastructure for fintech, a non-custodial stablecoin wallet infrastructure for fintech. Basically, in simple terms, what we basically do is like we provide fintechs with API to issue stablecoins, basically crypto, but stablecoins only, to their customer, deposit, withdrawal, without having to worry about like the entire blockchain underlying concept. They just have to use normal REST API they are used to. Now, one of the things that we care about is the fintech being able to have a very seamless experience like they would have done with traditional finance. Think Stripe, think Paystack, think any of these payment company. Now, because that was the core in our mind, there were things where we made decision on that solved scaling for us at a large phase. I'll give an example. During, let's say, when you are generating addresses or you are generating address and then you want to generate, let's say you have 1 million users and you want to generate address for the 1 million users. It's almost not scalable for us to run that sequentially, right? Like pick 1, 2, 3, 4, down to 1 million. Now, we thought of this from day one, not from the standpoint of million user, from the standpoint of how fast can we let this user know that we have actually generated this address on the blockchain in the easiest way that they can continue doing other things
while you do this in the
background. We do this in the background. And that was what we built for. Imagine our surprise when that particular single decision of giving the user fast feedback solved the problem of scaling. Of that same system now generated like, because we had a client that was like, oh, I want to migrate 300,000 addresses on your platform. I'm like, yes, we could support that. We tested it. It worked. We didn't have to do any other thing. But remember, the decision was user experience. And I think the same works everywhere. For example, if you are building a scheduling tool, maybe like in the case of Podix now, already without thinking of scale, in user experience, you want to think of, oh, how can I make sure that there's no double booking for a user? Because it's very frustrating that I probably, by the way, Podix doesn't have this problem. I'm just saying like, it's very frustrating. Like I selected a date, I selected a time, I'm filling in my form, trying to make a last minute decision, trying to fill in my credit card. And I click submit and it says space is already booked. This is a UX problem you are trying to fix, and you probably fix it with like a kitchen, like a second layer of like database like Redis, or you probably have like a queuing system, or you probably have something that just locks that database for like few minutes or few seconds. See, this is already user experience you are trying to solve. But how would it solve for scaling? It will solve for scaling by just already preventing race condition, right? Maybe it will prevent the case where 2 data is entering the database at the same time. It will prevent the case where your database is having a lot of load.
So everything that you're describing now is what most engineering teams wouldn't think about if they are just hired to do a piece of work.
Exactly.
So it's your job also to enable them to think like that.
Exactly.
To understand what you're building.
Exactly.
To explain them and map out the vision of the product to them.
Exactly.
And invite them to collaborate and co-create the product with you. But this is the trick. As a founder and as a business, you will naturally come back with a lot of pressure to them. Under that pressure, they will give up. building something that is scalable. If they're not, let's say like senior experienced enough or invested in the business enough. If they're a co-founder and they have a significant amount of shares in your business, probably they will fight for it.
Exactly.
But if they don't really understand where you're heading with this, really what's your vision, what are you trying to achieve, if you don't keep them informed, they most likely won't go this deep, and they will say, "Okay, let's leave this for later."
Let's leave it for later. Yeah, you're right.
That's a tricky part from the founder's perspective that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, but then the way a founder can solve that, and I'd like to understand your thoughts is that why not just onboard them on the vision from day zero? I used to speak to someone. There's someone that I really respect in like the Nigerian tech industry. He's actually a very great guy. He once said something about if he is hiring someone, skills is something he checks second. The first thing he checks is alignment with the vision. So what I keep telling business people is like, pressure is fine if the engineering team understands where it is coming from. Many times the engineering team I was explaining to someone recently, like engineering team just says something like, oh, we need to revamp our onboarding process, right? We need to revamp our booking process. Like you come with this pressure, but you don't give them the full picture. Things like a founder could come to me and say, we need to revamp our onboarding process and we need to complete it in 2 weeks, right? That is pure pressure. But think of it, you come this way. Guys, we are losing customers at drop off. Our onboarding process is a 10-minute process and customers are dropping off at this point. We need to make it as seamless as possible, get them into the system as fast as we can so we can increase revenue. Right now, this is what the percentage of drop off is. If you guys are able to pull this off, we are looking at this X amount of increase. Now they have a goal in mind.
100%.
They know what they are doing for. It's a whole different game. Like the communication in that space, those two communication has completely two different outcome
100%.
For an engineering team.
That's similar. Like you need an experienced CTO.
Yeah.
You need an experienced CEO.
Exactly.
Experienced CEOs will think of it like that.
Yeah.
Now here is the challenge. And this is like both sides have their own challenges that they need to fight with.
Exactly.
The challenge of a CEO and the founder, and especially if you're talking about the early stage, is that you don't have metrics. So the case that you explained is a later stage startup. You're tracking everything, monitoring, measuring. You have metrics and you come back with revenue, drop-off rate, percentages, etc. You back your decision with that and everyone is aligned and everyone understands. When you're in the early days, you're on the clock. You put together the team. You change your mind on daily basis as you evolve. Keeping everyone aligned is a skill that needs to be mastered. And sometimes it's even borderline impossible or difficult.
Yeah, true.
Because you're struggling to keep updated your co-founders and not the whole team. That's number one. Which is not in a sense of an excuse, it's in a sense of a challenge. Sometimes it's just challenging to keep, every time you want to do something, you need to build a whole proper use case and case study about that to go in front of the team. That's one. Second is what I've learned is, and maybe this is going to be controversial.
Okay, let's have it.
Democracies don't always work.
Interesting.
Only if you did a really good job is putting the team together and everyone in the room is
really good,
relevant and mature enough to engage in a proper type of conversation.
Yeah.
This type of, hey, let's talk together. Let me bring you up to my vision. Let me have you understand, etc. Sometimes someone doesn't understand. And no matter how much you explain, they don't understand. They don't get the vision.
Just give me the GR ticket.
And then sometimes I think as a leader, you need to manage people properly. And if you don't manage people properly, they also get lost. Sometimes teams are looking for someone who is going to tell them, do this, this, and this. I need you to deliver me these 4 things by the end of the week. No questions asked. Now, you need to know how to do this. I'm still learning how to do it. And I think this is a process that you keep learning all your life. How you manage people properly. But like in the early stage, there are a lot of these challenges every department is fighting with. They're both on the tech side. I understand the tech teams completely. There's this crazy founder coming up with all these ideas, changing his mind all the time or her mind. Listening to customers, want to make everyone happy. Just keeps coming back to us with all of these features, ideas, and so on. And I hear that. I think the job of a tech team is to ask why all the time.
Exactly.
Why? Why do we do this? To challenge the status quo, to challenge the ideas, and most importantly, to take the ideas and develop them in technical specs and tasks, etc. To unpack everything, because if they don't analyze the feature well, everything else is going to fall apart. If they estimate something with 5 points and it turns out to be 40 points. Then everyone lost.
So, and then even the business, the promise you've made to your stakeholders, it's all gone. Because,
at the moment we're going through that phase, so we're missing estimates enormously.
A lot.
And the learning is that we're not preparing for every feature enough. So we're not investing enough time to analyze it and to groom it, to understand what it really is. And then we get into a sprint with a feature that is not well defined. And then we realize throughout the sprint that it cannot be done. And then it ends up being 3 sprints instead of 1 sprint. So
that's a lot.
So that's a lot. And that's a learning again. I think there are two sides here, that both sides are making certain mistakes. Sometimes as a business, you need to accept things will take longer. Because tech team is sort of quote unquote afraid to say 3 months. They say, okay, we'll do it in a month.
They are always very optimistic. Engineers are very optimistic set of human beings.
And I think this comes because of business expectations and pressure, and them being afraid to say 3 months, because they think business will think, look at this guy 3 months. They don't know what they're doing. You don't need 3 months for this. It's a simple feature. Someone of experience would say we need a month to analyze this. Then we need a month to maybe to do or prepare, and then another month to test, and then we'll deploy. This doesn't mean you're actually actively going to work for 3 months.
3 months, exactly.
This is a timeline.
It's a process.
Now it's my job to say that's not acceptable. Tell me what you can give me in a month. And then you come back with the proposition of this can be done in a month. And then you either agree or you disagree.
Exactly.
And over time, you will come to a certain conclusion. Either an engineer is not good enough or a business is too optimistic.
True.
But this needs to be a back and forth.
It needs to be. And then it needs to be clear communication. Like you are very right. Like we've actually nailed like some of the important things, which is like engineers are a bit too optimistic, and then it's because of pressure, because they are worried about what the founders think. And then founders are also like having like very high expectation. What could potentially happen from an engineers, and this is to all builders currently listening to Buildable, is that learn to speak up and give the right estimate. Be reasonable, honestly. Like, because to be honest, when you tell them give 3 months, sometimes many are not reasonable. So like, it's always important, like you are also reasonable and be in the confinement of what reasonable really means to you. You can be very truthful to yourself. You know what the process is going to take you. So just give like a fair estimate. And then also like one thing you mentioned, like people don't think about the entire process. They think about building only. For example, if I give you 3 months, I've potentially included like a 2 weeks QA testing in that 3 months.
Or one spike in one sprint that is actually going to take three hours, but we're going to do it in this.
Or for some reason, maybe you already have existing customer and there's a production bug that happened within the sprint that we need to like account for. There's so many things to worry about in this space. But I think we've actually covered so much in terms of like building MVP, scaling, what founders should do. And I think there's already a lot of takeaways for people to take here. I'd like to like focus on something a bit like different. And we've talked about engineering. Let's talk a bit more like the growth side, or like the business side, or like let's say venture studio side. So I'll touch on 2 things. Like the first one is you had like this very good experience with venture studio, but also I want us to talk about Podix. And then the biggest thing I've been thinking about when it comes to Podix is like you had a podcast studio, Podster. At what point really, what was like that turning point where Podster just felt like our internal operation really needs Podix? Like at what point, and what were like those things that you looked at that made you feel like this was something going to happen for us to scale?
When we started Podster, I had a very clear vision how Podster needs to operate and what type of business Podster needs to be. With my previous experience of an agency, running an agency, software engineering firm was practically an agency. We would close a project, we would run it, do it for 6 months, then we'll go to another project. You had a team, and basically we were selling hours, and then continuously we have to chase and close new projects to keep the lights on. And the output of your work was never something that you have a control of. And satisfaction of your customers was never something that you would have a control of. Very rarely did we get a tap in the back and said, "Great job, guys." But mostly we were like, "Okay, hurry up, or this is shit." So I was really tired of that business model of running an agency and having customers who are not appreciating the amount of effort and work that you're putting in. And nobody's to blame here. It's just how the dynamic is set up, and the dynamic is wrong in the first place. And this can never really work seamlessly. So when Podster started building, I said, okay, this seems to be heading again towards some sort of an agency where we're a podcast production, we have clients, we're serving them, etc. And I wanted to build something that is like a productized service, something that is very standard, something that you have an absolute control of the output, and you have in a way control of customer satisfaction, and you are on top of it. So when we looked at the business like that, I realized that the only way to achieve something like that and to reduce these friction points and the points which could cause certain issues was to automate and streamline the experience of interacting with your business as much as possible. And this is where this first part of customers interacting with Podster was first on the roadmap. So how do they inquire about certain services? How do they educate themselves about certain services? How do they book the studio? How do they show up at the studio? How do they receive their files, etc.? And my idea was really inspired by Podster is inspired by a few businesses. One is McDonald's when it comes to SOPs and operations and processes. And then two is in a way low-cost airlines. So the booking process of low-cost airlines is taking you through a journey where you're having an opportunity to introduce customers with some additional services, etc., where this first step is very quickly. Then the checkout process is allowing you some more room for revenue growth. And I wanted to have the website built in a way that is answering most of the questions on its own, so that the amount of calls we are receiving is reduced. We were experiencing a massive issue in the beginning with Podster. At around 200 bookings a month, the number of WhatsApp messages and phone calls we were receiving was enormous. Rescheduling, canceling, inquiring about the services, what exactly is live mixing, what exactly is post-production, what's included in highlights, can you edit, etc. So I went out and looked for a tool that could do something like that for us, do it in a very seamless, intuitive, UX-friendly, and good-looking way. There was really nothing out there that could do this piece of work. We were using at the time Calendly integrated with WordPress, and it was super simple. And with our previous experience of engineering and the team, we said, let's build this for Podster. And we started building this first version of, at the time, just Podster's software for booking, scheduling, and managing the business. We scaled Podster on the back of that software for that year or so to Dubai, Singapore, to more than 1,000 bookings.
Nice.
And initial idea really was we're going to solve our own problem, and that tech will be an integral part of our business, and is going to be our USP and our IP, and is going to grow the value of the business. Podster will be a tech-driven, tech-based, tech-operated podcast studio network. Until the point we realized that, in a way, Podster's setup and the way how Podster is operating is limiting the potential of the software that we've built.
That you've built,
Because the scale of software would be connected to the scale of studios, and we couldn't open that many studios that fast. And then we decided to take the software out of the business, give it its own life, and deploy it to the market as the first and the only the revenue operations software for podcast studios, and hit that very, very extremely niche market of podcast studios.
Yeah.
And that's how the idea came. So we basically solved our own problem, scaled our business, experienced a lot as a podcast studio, and then decided to offer this back to the market as one of the world's leading podcast studios, now offering this software that we use to scale to other podcast studios to scale as well.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. So it was initially born out of like your own personal scaling. And see, to be honest, I like how you thought about building podcast, and then I think this is something I want founders to always highlight. And then it's also something I had in one of like your interviews where you mentioned something like when you're in the business of selling hours, scaling is going to be very hard because when you start selling hours, for example, as an agency, if you start selling hours, you keep increasing overhead cost, and it gets to a point where there's just a limit to how much overhead cost you can incur and still keep a business afloat. So like, going from that angle to building a software just makes a lot of sense. And it is something founders should keep in mind. It's like your first approach whenever you're building anything, and this is to every founder, because I see a lot of early stage startups have a very high burn rate. For example, when Podster started, imagine if instead of building a software, your solution was, let's set up a customer service center. Let's hire 10 people. That would have scaled. That would have felt like it solved the problem for 2 months. And then when you have 1,000 bookings, then you have to hire 20 more, then 30 more. Then you see a podcast studio like Podster having a headcount of 500 staff. It's like, why? It's not just going to work, right? So like for every founders out there, when you think about you selling hours, and then your first solution to every problem is to increase end count, think again, think technology, think how you can potentially scale that same service with technology with a minimal head count. I think this is no-brainer going to always be like a success for you. It's almost...
Especially these days,
exactly. Especially these days where everybody just wants to use their phone. They want to use their laptop. Like, we're already at that stage where we are serving markets where almost everybody is on the internet.
True, and there are so many tools that you can integrate now in your business that are replacing a necessity for a human to be involved.
Exactly, which means headcount increase is not like the biggest thing. So like now talking about that, it makes sense that you solve Podster's problem, and then it's really nice. Now, one thing that I feel like every founder would potentially want to learn from is that you then actually opened something that made you some sort of like savings in salary, in operational cost. You opened it up to your competitors. Like, what was the thought process behind that? Like, how did that not scare you as a founder or something? If scare is the right word.
Well, I'm not going to lie. We did go through a phase where we thought this is our IP, this is our differentiator, and this is what we're going to keep for ourselves. But then after it's actually a few months, because the whole Podster journey has been like a bit over 2 years. So I don't have say after 10 years, after 3 months.
After 3 months.
Look, I realized that while software is going to enable you to do to deliver your service more efficiently and better, it's not going to make you it's not really going to make you our direct competitor. Our USPs are different things. It's a community, it's people, it's care, it's customer service, it's support, it's the whole process, is the brand. Software is just one piece of it. And I believe that if we manage to enable 1,000 studios to grow with Podix, the whole industry will grow. And in that whole industry, hopefully we're going to stay relevant, dominant, and number one studio. So in a way, while we do help other studios grow with Podix, indirectly we're helping the whole industry grow. And the upside of having a software that helped thousands of studios grow is much higher than potentially even losing a position of being the number one studio. Podster for us is really a place where we try to gather amazing people who are meeting other amazing people. That's really it. Like the connections that happen in Podster are the most valuable thing, not the business, not the recordings. It's the relationships that are being built. And this is what we're trying to do with Podster. So build a network of these hubs around the world where these amazing people are coming and building these relationships. And for us, Podster is a great learning. It's a sandbox where we learn about the business. And we implement that learning into software that is helping other studios grow as well. So, while yes, technically you do create yourself, or enable the competition, to perform better, actually you're helping the whole industry grow, where you're still trying to remain a dominant player.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to every founder like listening to this, once again, it's more like think long term. I think that's the thing. Like competitions sometimes are always very healthy. Like it's always healthy to have a competition so you know what you're building. And then you said something that really stuck to me, which I think every founder could get as a learning, is that even if Podix scales for all podcast studio in Dubai, and then Podster potentially maybe loses its position as number one, you would still have a win because everybody is using your software. And then you mentioned one other thing, like that doesn't even bother you that much because at the end of the day, you are building a community, you are building a brand. While that makes sense for me is that I have used a previous studio before Podster. One of the reasons why I came back to Podster for my shooting was just in the brand, in the customer service, and the way like the brand itself just looks collected. Looks like everybody here knows what they are doing. And to be honest, this is not me telling you because you're like the co-founder of Podster. This is me just saying it because I like when people know what they are doing. And then the way the system is structured is like, you guys have it figured out. You know what you're doing. The feedback loop, the way you get feedback on your videos when editing and stuff. It just made sense to me. I'm like, I'm just going to be back here.
Thanks, right? Man, I appreciate it.
And then, you're welcome. And then the other part is like, I met you through the community. Something that potentially might have not even happened.
I think community is the key.
Exactly.
I think community is the key of any business. As a matter of fact, we are building a community for podcast studio owners as well now as a part of Podix.
That's really good.
This is where the real value is coming.
Yeah, that's really good. So like, I mean, if I would give anybody any takeaway from this particular thing we've just discussed now is that as a founder, if you are building anything, think of that thing you can build that cannot be easily replicated. I keep telling founders, software, anybody can rebuild your software. What do you offer them that someone else cannot see and just copy?
So I have to step in.
Yeah,
it's an amazing, you inspired me. There's this podcast Acquired.
Acquired, yeah.
Do you listen to Acquired?
I think so. No, I don't think so.
Acquired. Everyone listening to the podcast, Acquired is the podcast to go and listen. Basically, these guys unpack stories of some of the most successful companies out there in the world. The episodes last for 5 hours, and they go from the day of founding the business till today. And they're unpacking Microsoft, Nvidia, Rolex, Starbucks, McDonald's, etc. Amazing show.
Nice.
So when I was listening to the episode about Meta, Facebook, obviously the whole story from the beginning, from the early days of starting on Harvard, etc. I've picked up a few points along the journey where they invented something. So that really got me to think. They invented, for example, a news feed, all right, which was a completely new concept. Yeah. And from the coding engineering perspective, news feed was a difficult thing to crack. How do you make it work? They invented like, for example. Yeah. And then I went back to my team and said, look, what we are really doing with Podix is great. We are building and streamlining the whole process of booking, scheduling, etc. Our really game is not on the invention. It's more on the first mover. How do we go fast to the market and be the first mover to acquire the market fast, and then it's difficult for anyone to compete with you. True. But at the same time, I think we need to spend some time thinking about inventions. How do you create something that nobody else created? And that's hard to replicate later on. So how do you patent something? How do you create a piece of code or something that is completely going to unlock some new value? So there are ideas who are basically digitalizing a manual process or just building a workflow or doing a certain thing is better. But there are ideas who are about inventions. And usually inventions are unlocking exponential scale. So when they introduced like button, their engagement levels went through the roof. And it was a really simple invention, right? It was not something. Invention doesn't need to be something very complicated.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like rocket science.
So when you said that you need to think about what's your USP, what's making you unique, you can always think about, there are different ways to go to the market. You can say we're going to be fast and first. We don't have to be. How many companies like Uber opened up in new markets? They said, hey, Uber is probably coming to I don't know, Vietnam, let's say. let us quickly build our own Uber here, and they're going to acquire us when they arrive.
Exactly.
Many companies around the world did that, successfully exited hundreds of millions of dollars.
True.
Happy days, right? There is that play that you can go for. It doesn't have to be invention. But there is another play where you're inventing something. This is really giving you a time window that is way longer than when you're building something that has a timestamp on it.
Timestamp, yeah, exactly. That makes sense. So like, I mean, you've nailed it. Like the key takeaway is just always think of something that gives you like a hedge. Think of like an invention. Think of like something you want to do differently. I keep telling people like, I'm like, if I'm to start a particular company today, for example, I would always think of what can I do differently. Let's say, for example, I'm starting a company like, what's that company that is very common in Dubai? Like everybody almost does it. I think it's a gym, or let's say like fitness studio. It's a big thing in Dubai where plenty of people do it. I'm like, if I'm probably starting one today, like I can't win from equipment standpoint.
You need to do something.
You need to do something different. And then sometimes I keep telling people like, maybe I'll build one where everybody I make sure like I'm building a people process where everybody that interacts with the gym in one shape or form, they get a constant level of satisfaction in terms of how they are attended to, in terms of how they feel supported in their fitness goal. Like this is something that when you think about it, it's not about the money you put into getting the product. It's about just finding that one thing that you can be consistent with, you know, just stay consistent with that USP and then let people know that. Like,
but that's what I say. You don't have to come up with a new business.
Exactly.
You just need to find something that doesn't work really well and make it work really well.
Yeah. And then stay consistent on that stuff. And then that's it. So yeah, I think we've really had like a very interesting chat, and I'm really, thank you so much for coming. I think, I forgot to mention like in the beginning, how Vok reached out is also one of the good USP of like Podster, because I posted my first episode. To be honest, I wasn't expecting like so much like engagement on the first episode, because I'm like, I'm a software engineer. It's my first time on the mic. I don't even know if it was the nice episode. And then he reached out. I was like, this is really good. This is really nice. I'm like, I checked his profile. I'm like, yo, really? I'm like, okay, I need to be composed. And then I was like, I typed a message and I'm like, need to be composed. Go back, read it, type again, figure it out. This is really good. So like what I'm trying to say is like, he's a really, really good guy. And then I'm very grateful for this opportunity to shoot. And then it's also something that gives like a very good USP for like Podster, where like in communities, you meet people you seemingly wouldn't potentially just reach out to and say, let's have a coffee. They'll probably be like, nah, but you're saying let's discuss what you like talking about, and then you're like, yes. So like, so really nice. Thanks, you for joining.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I enjoyed it. One of the reasons I reached out is because it was really relevant.
Yeah. Thank you.
Feedback in general for podcasters out there is that if you're starting a show, try to start something that is focused, niche, and has its own target audience. You're the first one that they reached out like I did. And it's because it was relevant to me.
Nice.
But if it was just another business podcast,
yeah,
I wouldn't probably feel like this is, while it's relevant, it's just another business podcast.
Nice.
You had something unique, and I always wanted to start a show that would follow my idea actually for the show, and maybe someone can take it away or you can apply some of that.
Let's see.
Say 20 episodes where you map out 20 steps from idea stage, customer feedback and validation, prototype, MVP, go-to-market, scale, infrastructure, hiring, etc.
Yeah.
You map out 20 episodes, and then you look for the perfect guest for each of these episodes. And then you map out all of that, and then you go in and record. And then you, in a way, record the 20 episodes playbook on how to build a product. Even better if you can do that specifically for Dubai, because that makes it relevant. If you do this for the whole world, it gives you access to a much wider audience. It also puts you in an arena with the most successful out there.
Yeah.
But if you say, hey, this is how you build a product in Dubai, told you by 20 people who already did it. For anyone who is trying to do that in Dubai, it's super relevant. And then you might have those few thousand super relevant audiences instead of trying to fight with Stephen Bartlett out there. Right?
True, yeah.
So when I saw that, it reminded me of that concept, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And I'm working on Podix now, so I think it's relevant.
That makes a lot of sense.
Job,
thank you. And thanks for the kind words, and thanks for like reaching out. I really, really do appreciate that. And for what you've just mentioned about the idea, I'll definitely share it with my team. I think it makes a lot of sense, to be honest, like picking people for different phase instead of discussing everything on one episode, which has its own different niche, but like speaking to Dubai people specifically, because honestly for me, Buildable was supposed to just help everybody build. And anything that helps me achieve that building phase for anybody that listens is what matters. I was talking to a friend like, I wish there was a place where I could just go, listen to few episodes, and I'm filled with ideas or innovative things, ways to think about things. And that's really the KPI for me for Buildable. So like what you just said just perfectly aligns with it, where it's like, I want to build in Dubai. What do I need to listen to? What do I need to read? Man, just watch this 20 episode and then you are like 10x founder. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much, Vok. And do you have any final advice, any final key takeaway before we close out on this?
No, just episode? Go for it. Yeah. Just go for it. Don't rush. Just go for it and don't rush and find experienced tech people.
Yeah, for sure. Like, find experienced software engineers, find experienced tech people, find people that have actually been to war to build your MVP, and then you would make it. So thank you very much. Really appreciate. And then for everybody listening, I mean, if you stayed up until this point, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to be like, don't forget to like, subscribe, share. That's like the YouTube thing.